Nick, we've been on NASCAR and kind of interjected with IndyCar for a while, um, but I want to bring in Formula One. So, unfortunately, the 2020 Formula One season has not begun yet. I don't know when it will begin. I think they might have or
I
put out a
think
plan. Um,
later July. I think that was the earliest.
we can look this up real quick and find it. But
Uh,
what's interesting is that the spending cap is going to stay in place here for 2020, and it's actually going to be fully implemented in 2021. The new car for them is getting pushed back a year, just like it is for NASCAR. That's too bad. I hate to see that,
it
but
is
I
ultimately
understand
the right move.
it is
If they
absolutely.
can't get the testing in now, I mean, why rush it? You
You're
know, get what
yeah,
the testing you need. Take the extra time that you're gonna have
yes.
now to learn everything you can, and then the car will be better served for it. And by the way, Formula One will be back 4th of July weekend at the Red Bull Ring in Austria,
Oh, they're doing
which
two races there. That's right.
by the way, Red Bull Racing have won the last 3 events there.
Well, hopefully they win this one. I will say one thing that was really upsetting is uh, the oh boy, I can't remember the name of it, but it's the track that they just redid and added banking into some of the turns. It, it's gonna kill
Do you
me.
remember where it was?
I think it was Scandinavian or it was Dutch.
Zandvoort.
Zandvoort, thank you. They just reconfigured Zandvoort and or just reconfigured a couple of the turns to give them more banking. I was looking forward to that race. It should be very interesting. It should be flowy, and it's canceled this year. So I'm really looking forward to that next year. As I'm looking forward to the spending cap because I think NASCAR has to implement that. First off, I think with that you can also say, hey, you got to spend some more money on your Xfinity and Truck Series teams. Not that much more, but it'd be nice if you did.
One time.
The president of
It
LFR last year, someone asked him on Twitter, how much does it cost you to bring your one car to the track for a weekend, including, or I don't know if it was including personnel or what the exact thing was, but he said 400K, one car, one weekend, $400,000. That's too much money. That's too much
that is
money. So the spending cap
ridiculous.
idea has some consequences that aren't negative, actually, and were completely unforeseen, for me at least. Which is now there's talks about Formula One teams using the money they're saving on this spending cap and investing in other open wheel racing like IndyCar. So there's rumors of, for example, Ferrari and McLaren, obviously, but who have already made the attempt. But Ferrari in particular, um, moving in order to keep some of their employees paid and keep them on staff, move to IndyCar, start an IndyCar team, and that could
Wait,
have serious consequences or serious effects, rather, is probably a better word, on the future of IndyCar and whether it goes back to being international, whether it goes back or whether we kind of see
it
this
should.
this I
They were on the
it's
edge
tough.
of doing that with Cart in the mid 90s, and I agree, Cart had its problems, but Cart was at the pinnacle of American motorsports in the early 90s, and when it fell, that's a big part of the reason NASCAR took over. Got to give that credit.
You're right.
Cart was bigger than NASCAR in the early to mid
The
90s.
split killed open wheel
Yeah,
American
and it
racing.
completely killed that momentum. Cart was starting to be on the verge of threatening Formula One's popularity, and they were starting to move into international territories. I mean, they had a race in Australia, Surfers Paradise, which is beloved by IndyCar fans. Uh, I can't remember. Did they have a race?
I believe they raced
There
at
were
Brands
rumors of it.
Hatch. That might have been early
That might
IndyCar
have been in
years.
that might have been the Champ Car years,
Oh, okay.
actually. But um, and they had more international drivers. You had Ayrton Senna,
Yeah.
who tested for Penske and was strongly considering a move over to IndyCar. So this would be fantastic for the sport if you get these big name F1 teams, especially Ferrari, who I don't
Yeah.
know if you know they've had a past of I mean, they've competed in IndyCar races before in the 50s and 60s. The Indianapolis 500, not really necessarily successful attempts. McLaren won an Indy 500, Bruce McLaren, um, and in the 80s too. Ferrari, they weren't happy with the regulations in Formula One, and you can debate whether or not this was a power play, whether or not they were actually going to make the switch to IndyCar at all. But they built a full chassis with a motor, and it was ready to go. They were testing it. So this is not the first time that Ferrari have considered making the jump, the plunge into IndyCar, but now it seems more plausible than ever, and I think it would be absolutely spectacular for motorsports in general.
Yeah. So what's interesting, you bring that up, is this time it's not. It can't be considered a power play because that's not what this is.
It's about
This is about keeping
putting
people
their
on
money in the right
payroll
places.
and putting their money in the right places. Look,
Because
Ferrari and these other Formula One companies now have an opportunity to invest in American motorsport in a way, in a type of motorsport that they already have some experience with. They're not breaking into NASCAR; they're breaking into IndyCar. And you know how good that would be for IndyCar,
yeah,
a racing series that, look, hey, NASCAR's got its problems with manufacturers too, but IndyCar only has two manufacturers. NASCAR has three. That's not really that. That's not good either. But only two, Chevy and Honda. Okay, you want to sit here and tell me that Ferrari moving over to IndyCar and maybe Mercedes moves in, or McLaren, like even just two manufacturers, you think that doesn't have the chance to create, maybe a snowball effect is too strong of language, but to maybe bring in a couple more. Maybe Toyota says, hey, we want to invest in this too, let's take on Honda. Or maybe you have someone someone else, I don't know, Aston Martin decides, hey, we want to get involved in this. IndyCar sets up a price cap, and they make everything a little bit better.
yeah,
You bring more drivers in. You now have international companies from all over bringing in more drivers, bring more diversity in, which could possibly lead to a serious potential for stars to rise up through the
yeah,
IndyCar series. And,
absolutely,
and and you need stars for motorsports. You need someone for the people to root for, or root
exactly.
against, or root against.
Yeah, you need both. You need heroes and villains. But back to the grand scheme of the sport, um, you know, these teams with the budget cuts or the spending caps, they're not just gonna go to their sponsors and be like, "Oh, hey, we don't actually need all this money. You can pay us less now."
Yeah.
No. What do you do when you have a surplus? You don't just not use the money, because then the higher ups are gonna think, "Oh, well, it doesn't cost that much to fund this branch of the company, so we're gonna lower their lower their budget." No, you take that money and you put it in other places. And that's exactly what teams like Ferrari and Mercedes too, people are considering that. Maybe even, who knows, maybe even Renault.
Well, look at all the money those three companies are putting
Yeah,
into F1, and now, I
exactly.
mean, in
And
some
now,
cases, more than half of the amount they spend now, I believe, will no longer be allowed to be spent. Do you
yeah,
remember what the actual budget cap is? I can look it up real quick.
it's 145. It's 175 right now, but then it's going to be 145 million,
I want you to think about this, man. All
which
right,
will leave Ferrari with about 100 million left over
how much money
to
did
play with.
Mercedes put in, man? They put in like $750 million one year, if I remember correctly. Something stupid like that. Or maybe it was 580. Some absorbent amount of money that I can't even imagine. All right? They have so much money out. They have hundreds of millions of dollars left over. That is more than enough to create four IndyCar teams, let alone one. Is there a limit on the number of cars a team can have in IndyCar?
Uh,
IndyCar
I would imagine. I mean, Roger Penske has 4 cars, so
probably.
although I believe he's run. I mean, Juan Montoya's been like a fifth man in the 500 a couple of times. I believe
Well,
I could.
the 500 has its own special rules in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, so I don't
So
know.
I don't know how that plays into the rest of the IndyCar season, but who knows? I would imagine it'd be, 4 would be the general cap.
Right. But I mean, also by the way, there have been some concept liveries of Ferrari. There have been some concept liveries of Mercedes, and I think there's been
Yeah.
some concept liveries of Red Bull. And oh my gosh, if they don't look like the most beautiful race cars I've ever
Yeah.
seen. And also, IndyCar moving to the new body style looks phenomenal. Moving into the cockpit, otherworldly.
Oh, I love it.
Otherworldly.
I was really worried. I was really worried it was gonna look stupid like the Halo, but it looks very nice. It actually looks like what a lot of people think. Like when you see those probably like 10 years ago, you saw concepts of what open wheel racing was gonna look like.
Yeah,
That's kind of what it looks like. It has that sort of jet fighter cockpit. I love it.
it looks like a
And of course,
spaceship almost, you know?
yeah, it looks really, really cool.
Yeah. Um, but one thing I'm interested to see is if any of these potential uh, new manufacturers object to Roger Penske owning the series and team. I'm curious if that's something that they are very not happy about. I know us as the people maybe seeming a little bit hypocritical on this, but we don't care. It seems fine.
Well, I
Um,
know there are teams like I'm pretty sure Bobby Rahal, he's very supportive of it. I think most of the IndyCar teams are.
yeah, so I find that very interesting, and honestly, I kind of trust Roger Penske on this front. I don't think he's willing to cheat. I think he has too much respect for IndyCar and racing as a whole.
This is a childhood dream of his. He's
Yeah,
always wanted to own IndyCar. And ultimately, like I said before, he is a very astute businessman. He knows what's gonna make him money, and that's not cheating and just
yeah,
dominating every race.
yeah,
It's having good competition, bringing more competitive cars into the field. He wants to grow this series. He's already, doing things to completely revitalize Indianapolis Motor Speedway in ways that, maybe the Holman George family never thought of before. So he is going to do ultimately what's best for the sport. And I think put his interests are what's best for the sport now, not just his team.
I completely agree. At first glance, it seems wrong and irresponsible, but you dig deeper and you realize the kind of guy that Roger Penske is, um, and you see that it's all right and it's not going to be an issue.